Hello and welcome to the TechBrain channel. In this video, I'll be demonstrating how to build a MongoDB Atlas cluster using Terraform. The prerequisites will be access to an M0 free tier. M0 is a great starting point if you're exploring Atlas and you'd like to learn about MongoDB Cloud Database. Let's dive in. So first thing I need to do is to make sure that I create an API key. An API key is essential for Terraform to be able to authenticate into Atlas. So to do that, I'll go to my organization. So I've got an organization here and I'll click on that just to confirm that I do have access to it. So that's my organization. And what's next? So next up is to make sure that I add a new API key. So this API key is going to be given the following permissions: organization project creator. So we're adhering to the principle of least privileges as we do this. So the organization project creator can create projects. So this is going to be essential for us. So I'll just say that this is my demo API key. I'll then click on next. So the public key and the private key here, this is the equivalent of the username and corresponding password. I'll need to keep these credentials saved for later use, so I will save them and reference them later on in my Terraform script. I also need to set up an API access list for additional security. This is essentially a firewall around my Atlas cluster to say that this API key can only be used from certain IP addresses. So I'll click this option here, which says Add Access List Entry. So I'll select my current IP address, click Save, and then I'm done. Once I've got this set up, the next step is to go to the command line, and on the command line I do have access to a Terraform file that I created earlier. So I'll go through this Terraform file. So this Terraform file captures the following. The required provider is MongoDB Atlas, running that version, and we've got reference to these variables, the public key and the private key. So in our case, the public key and the private key, these were the two values that I generated when I created the new API key. We also have my project name, Atlas organization ID. So my Atlas organization ID is going to come from here. So I'll go over and click on that setting, grab the organization ID, and also save that for later reference. I do have a variables file where I'll plug these values in so that this script can actually pick them up. Okay, so we've got the organization ID, I've got my project name. So I'm setting the project name in the variables file. So I want to deploy an M0 free tier cluster. So we're creating an M0 free tier cluster. This is not a dedicated tier. We get 0.5 gigabytes of storage, and I want to be running MongoDB version 8, and that's the instance size name, which is an M0. Free forever, as MongoDB likes to say. I am then setting up the credentials for my database user. They will be authenticating using Scrumsha, and I want them to be in the read write any database role. So there is a whitelist that I am defining here. So with this whitelist, I need to be extremely careful. I don't want to let the whole world access my database cluster. Therefore, I can make an edit to that value. So let me do something like that. So I'll plug in my IP address, and it has to be this and only this, so use that CIDR. Okay, so that's updated. So what would I like to output at the end of this deployment? So I'd like to be able to get access to the actual cluster URL and then be able to connect to it. So my cluster is going to be deployed in this AWS region. So currently Atlas supports 3 cloud providers. You've got AWS, you've got Azure, as well as GCP. So I'm going to run with this one here, US East 1. So I'll come out of here and then head back to Atlas. So Atlas, as you know, this is MongoDB's cloud database offering. So I'll go to the organization, and currently in this organization I have one project. So what does a project actually contain? So a project is going to contain the clusters that you've created. In this case, I have a cluster that I'm calling cluster 0. So if I click there, go to cluster 0, you can see the 3 databases that make up the cluster. So I have a primary, single writable primary, as well as 2 secondaries. So the secondaries are read-only from the perspective of the application. So that's what it looks like. So with that done, I think we're now in a position to actually deploy our cluster using Terraform. So I'll head back to my command line, and I'll just do something like ls -hl, just make sure what files I've got. Okay, so I've got my main.tf, and I think we spoke about variables. So what I'll do is also make sure that my variables are correctly configured. So I'll say nano variables, and a few things I need to change in here. Actually, not here. So these are all the variables that I've got defined. The values for these variables will actually be in the tf vars file. So it's going to be Terraform that one there. So let me plug in the values that I copied earlier. So I want this value here, that's the public key, and also I want to get the private key, so equivalent to essentially a username and password. So the terminology there might suggest that we are referring to asymmetric encryption, but no, this is just the equivalent of username and password. And that's my organization ID, which is the same value, and this is the project I'd like to create. And that's the cluster that I'll be creating, and also the credentials for the database user. So I'll save that, come out of here, and I will initialize. So I'll say Terraform init. So next up is Terraform plan. So let's see what we're trying to orchestrate. So it tells us that we'll have 4 resources being created at the end of this orchestration. What are these 4 resources? So there is a cluster, and that there summarizes what's in the cluster. There's a database user, a project, as well as an IP access list. So before I get these provisioned, I'll go back in Atlas and I'll show you where we might find these values. So let's look at the database user. The database user is going to be under database access. And also, what else do we have here? Network access. Do I have any entries there? So under network access should be my IP access list. So currently I only have this IP access list. I definitely want to get rid of this one. Never ever use that in production. So that's for my VPC, and that I recognize. So that change that I've just made, Atlas is applying that. Okay, so that looks about right. So I looked at database access, and this is where the user that we are creating via the automation script will be visible. Under network access is where I'll be able to see my IP appearing, saying that only connections coming from this IP are allowed to access the database. Only clients coming from that IP are allowed to access the database. Okay, so what next? Advanced, not relevant in the case of what we're doing here. I'll head back and confirm that yes, this is exactly what I'd like to do. So I'll say Terraform apply, and then I'll say auto approve. Okay, so let's get ready to run that. So if I've done things correctly, it should start the provisioning process. So creating the project, adding the whitelist, so the advantages of automation are clear. It is quicker to do this kind of thing rather than clicking in the UI. There are alternatives to doing what I'm doing right now, which is where you're using the Atlas CLI, Atlas command line interface, allowing you to automate various aspects of your deployment. So the fact that I have a script that captures all the commands means that I can actually version my deployments. I can have that nicely controlled in source control. I can do diffs between different versions to see what's changed, and that's all great for DevOps in terms of streamlining processes and ensuring repeatability. Our deployment is done, if this is to be believed. So what I'll do is I will try to connect to this cluster here. So my admin. And let's see if we can get in. Okay, so we have logged in. As you can see, get rid of everything else and say show DBs. So those are the databases, and anything else I'd like to do. So say db.demo.insert1 just to test the permissions that we were given. So say message is hello world. So I can do an insert, and if I do demo, I can do a find. Great. So I can actually look at the status of my replica set. What did we end up creating? So as we can see here, we've got a 3-node replica set: secondary node, and also a primary node. Okay, so looking good. We have just been able to deploy our replica set using Terraform. I can do things like admin command, confirm who I am logged in as. So let's do something along these lines and let's see what we get. Okay, so it says logged in as my admin, and these are the permissions that I've got. So this is the project I need to be on. So I'll go into network access, and yep, that's the IP that's on the IP access list. Database access, yep, that's the user we created, and they're authenticating using Scrum. If I look at the cluster or clusters, that's my M0 cluster, and my M0 cluster is a 3-node replica set. Okay, awesome. So that is how you're going to go about automating the creation of an M0 cluster. All in all, fantastic cloud database. I find it extremely versatile working with MongoDB Atlas. So yeah, if you'd like to clear up after you've done your deployment, this is the way that you'd go about doing that. So you can do Terraform and destroy. So this is just perhaps good practice if the environments that you're using are somewhat restricted, or perhaps you just need to clean up what you've set up. This is a destructive operation, so be careful before you do this. So it goes away, starts removing everything that was created, and I can probably track the progress over here. Do a refresh, we can see those are the changes taking place. The database user is gone, the IP access list gone, and the clusters are being terminated. Yeah, all good. Give it a spin. So that was the demo where we created a MongoDB Atlas cluster using Terraform. At the end of that deployment, I was able to successfully log into the database, run a few commands, and yeah, thank you for watching. Until next time, please remember to like and subscribe, and if there's any content that you'd like us to cover on this channel, feel free to drop us a message. Thank you. Have a good day.